What happens when the career you've built, the title you've earned, and the success you've achieved are no longer what drives you? For many high performers, the question isn't, what have I done? It's, what's next? Today, we're exploring how to turn that question into a powerful new chapter with someone who's made it his mission to help others design their encore. Our guest is someone who understands transformation, not just in business, but in life too. Jack Calhoun is the founder of Encore Career Lab, where he helps high achieving professionals design meaningful second acts after their primary careers. Before founding Encore, Jack spent more than 2 decades as the managing partner of Capital Directions, a wealth management firm. When Jack sold the firm in his early 50s, he faced the same question that so many successful professionals eventually do. What's next? That transition revealed a gap between financial retirement planning and what he calls life planning, the process of creating purpose and fulfillment beyond the paycheck. From that realization, Encore Career Lab was born. Today, Jack helps people redefine what it means to work, contribute, and thrive later in their lives. His insights speak to a powerful shift happening right now. Americans in their 50s, 60s, and beyond are not retiring, they are reimagining. So let's dive in and explore how we can all design encore careers that are both purposeful and practical. Good morning, Jack.
Bob, how are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for joining us here today. As I said, let's dive right in. Jack, you've said that retirement as we know it is an outdated concept. Can you explain what you mean by that? And why do you believe so many people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s are rethinking what comes next?
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't really understand it until I sort of jumped into it and experienced it myself. The concept of retirement was really essentially invented in the 1930s by government and industry leaders. And it sounds like a conspiracy theory. It's really not. It was well intentioned back then. But when the Social Security Act came out, they included an earnings test that basically said when you turn 65, you're eligible to get your Social Security benefits, which was the first time there'd ever been, kind of that social safety net. But it also had this earnings test that said if you want to get your benefits, you have to quit working essentially entirely. You couldn't really do anything to generate any meaningful income. And at the time, there was some logic to that. For one, life expectancy was 61 in the US back then.
Hmm.
And so most people didn't even live long enough to see Social Security. And, we had a very heavily manufacturing and agrarian, agricultural based economy. And people who were 60 years old back then, people smoked and drank a lot and they weren't in great shape. Medical care was nothing like it is now. And so people were worn out when they got to their 60s. And to do that kind of work was really a lot to ask. And so most people didn't have a problem with it. And so really it created this idea that we stop working when we turn 65 and that it's just sort of our time to leisure and recreate and just kind of cruise it on in. And that really has stayed in our culture, our society for almost a century now. But along the way, life expectancies have stretched out dramatically. And, people are in much better shape now, and medical care is vastly better. And we have a knowledge economy, right? We don't have so much dependence on the physical labor that work used to be 100 years ago. But still, we cling to this 65 idea as the time where, I work until I'm 65, and then when I'm done, I recreate. And what we find and what I found is recreation and leisure is great. It doesn't take nearly as much time as you think. You are left with the reality of having to create a meaningful and purposeful third act for yourself. And really, we don't have much of a blueprint for it. And really, it's only been in the last 30 or 40 years that it's even been something that's come up, as far as genealogically speaking. Our grandparents didn't really grapple with this stuff because, they didn't really have any options and they weren't in great shape. So we're all kind of going through it together. And really, my intent was to try to help bring some structure and a framework to this so that when people are exiting their careers and heading off into the traditional retirement phase of life, they realize that it's not a binary choice and there is a third way that they can create for themselves.
To help put some structure around this concept, Jack, there are some terms and some experiences that maybe we need to help define. And one of them is that people assume an encore career, kind of post-retirement, if you will, just means doing less of what you've always done before. However, I
Hmm.
think it is that you define an encore career as a little bit differently. And can you do that definition for us? And how does it have that powerful stage of life for people to reinvent themselves?
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I think historically, probably the model of the gray-haired senior partner at the law firm who, gets into his 60s and he gets the corner office and he's, playing golf and making rain and he's working 20 hours a week. And that was viable in those professions back in the day, not that long ago, really. It's not anymore. We don't live in that world anymore. And just doing less of what you did for your whole career really isn't viable because things are moving so fast. And as we age, it's harder to keep up with the pace of change and new technologies. And truthfully, in corporate America, there aren't a lot of avenues for people to just do less of what they did. But beyond that, to me, is the question and the issue of is that really going to inspire you and give you a sense of renewal and rejuvenation for this third act of your life? And maybe it is. Maybe it is. It's a personal choice, but I think for most people, it's exploring new avenues, new capabilities, building on these intrinsic qualities that we have. A big focus for us is what we call your hidden wisdom. It's the stuff that we've acquired, the knowledge, the experience, the judgment, the perspective, the ability to see the big picture and synthesize things that are disparate, stuff that is just the voice of experience. It's so valuable, it's so important, and the world needs it now more than ever as, progressively younger people control technologies that are influencing all of our lives. We need wisdom more than ever in this world. And so that's a big part of my inspiration is to help our clients surface that. We take it for granted and to appreciate it and to start thinking, okay, I have a lot here to offer. How can I sort of repackage this in a way that allows me to live this life I've been dreaming of, but still maintain that sense of purpose and, for a lot of people, a meaningful income too.
So let's go with that concept of intrinsic value. You talk about the shift from extrinsic goals like titles and income to those intrinsic goals like meaning and impactfulness. How can people set goals that align with these new definitions of what success might be?
Yeah, that was really one of the biggest blind sides for me, I think. When I left my career, sold my company, was thinking I was just going to do a different thing that had the same sort of goals and values and priorities. And it was disorienting to me because what I realized was my goals had shifted and my values had shifted, and a lot of my contemporaries that were going through it were expressing the same thing. And that is that when we're younger, our goals are very tangible, these extrinsic goals that you've talked about. And they're the proverbial SMART goals, right? They're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. And so it's easy to check them off, right? We're striving to get a particular title or an income level or a house in a school district that we want our kids to go to, or, whatever that is. And it's easy to check those things off and feel like we've accomplished our goals. When we get into our 50s and 60s and certainly beyond, for a lot of us, it's a time of simplifying. Our kids, if we had them, have flown the nest. And, we've kind of got the stuff and, we're not really interested in status like we were 20 years ago. And so it makes goal setting challenging because the things that really drive us as we get older are these intrinsic softer goals like fulfillment and connection and meaning and joy and love. And those aren't things that you check off a to-do list, right? You might feel fulfilled today, but not so fulfilled tomorrow, right? And so, really, what we have to orient around, I think, is finding work that gives us those feelings, those emotional end states, as I call them, the work that makes us feel fulfilled and accomplished and connected and joyful in itself. And that I think is something that people have to really go into this third act with their eyes open about, that it's the old goals, about acquiring more stuff and titles and status and all that. It's just not going to drive many of us as we get older.
Jack, I find that many people expect to fill their retirement years by volunteering more. From your perspective, is volunteering enough to create meaning and purpose, or should people be thinking bigger about how they can contribute?
Yeah, it's a thorny discussion because I think volunteering is super important. I do it. I'm sure we all do it for causes we believe in. Where I think it gets off track is when people who have been heavily invested in their careers, have been successful, they leave their careers, they retire, they sell it, whatever it is, and so they feel like they're in good shape, right? And they don't really need to be out there obsessing about money and all the stuff we just talked about. And so, a lot of them, out of the goodness of their hearts, feel like, well, I'm going to devote my time to volunteering. That'll be my new mission and purpose. And it could be part of it. But volunteering does not give us the sense of accomplishment and self worth and being valued and being needed that our work gives us, because volunteering is not about that, right? It's not about us. It's about us contributing selflessly to a cause that we believe in. And, a lot of times we might get a plaque or something, some acknowledgement for some volunteer work we've done, and we're a little self conscious about it because we didn't go into it for our own personal sense of worth and to have the attention on us. But our work is what gives us a sense that we're doing things that call our highest and best selves to use for people that value and appreciate that. And, for most of us, there's an exchange of money there that shows the appreciation, right? The value that you're delivering. And I think when that part goes away, it can be really disorienting. There is a study that's called the 100-hour rule of volunteering that, basically says that if you volunteer more than about 100 hours a year, you don't get any additional sense of fulfillment from that volunteering effort. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It's just you shouldn't view that as the way that you're going to continue to feel fulfilled. Because if you start doing too much of it, you're just going to feel like you're doing an unpaid full-time job, right? And so I think that's where I try to help people make the distinguishment is let's view it as a portfolio, right? I love that metaphor being in wealth management for most of my career. You need a wedge for a volunteer, but you need a wedge for meaningful work and work that's on your terms. And just to distinguish between those two.
This next note that I made to myself, Jack, the identity question is one that I struggled with personally when I moved on to my Encore career. You worked with so many people who struggle with a loss of identity after leaving very demanding careers. Why do you think that transition is so difficult for them in that identity area? And what helps people rebuild a sense of purpose and belonging?
Yeah, it is. It blindsided me. And I was a liberal arts creative personality in the investment business. I was more of the entrepreneurial, ADD type. So I was kind of a unicorn personality in that industry. And I never felt like I was born to do it, right? I thought I was pretty good at parts of it, and I enjoyed working with clients, and I felt like it was an honorable way to make a living and a good way to provide for my family. But I thought when it was done, I would be fine reinventing myself. And I underestimated how much of my identity was wrapped up in what I did. And just when people say, what do? I say I'm a partner in a wealth management firm, and there it is. And when that goes away, you kind of hem and haw, even if, you sold a company or you went on your own terms, whatever that was, it's still a displacing feeling. There's a sense of displacement there. What I've found is that this is typical for most people. There's a term enmeshment that really relates to how much of our identity gets wrapped up into our careers, especially for these strivers, as Arthur Brooks calls them in his books, From Strength to Strength. It's people who've been, I call it career invested, right? I used to call it high achievers, but people who are high achievers don't like to call themselves high achievers. So I have to call it career invested. It's for people for whom work was a big part of their identity and their life. And that's the enmeshment. And, as an example, I have a client in the program who's a recently retired physician. He's an OBGYN, and I was talking to him about it. I was like, you didn't tell people, that you were someone who helps people have babies. You said, I am an OBGYN, right? I didn't say I help people manage their investments. I said, I'm an investment advisor. And so that's the way our culture is oriented. And when that goes away, it is very disorienting. I think it hits men maybe harder. Men don't do as good a job generally of having a more well-rounded social life, but it certainly applies to women too, who've been, career invested. And so I think we have to try to strip that part away from the essence of who we are. And that's why in our program, we start with focusing on the why. Simon Sinek's got a great book by that title, Start with Why. And I'm a big believer in that. And so strivers love to be able to answer the question, what do you do? And people tend to rush into that what before they understand their why. And so the first phase, the first few weeks of our program are really devoted to helping people get really clear on their why before they start entertaining the what. Because when those are in alignment, then they feel congruous and then they feel confident. And when, people who've been really successful in their lives feel confident, there's really no stopping them. So that's what we're striving for.
Jack, I hear about the advice people give, well-meaning advice, follow your passion. You hear that really everywhere. But you've really cautioned against taking that too literally. What's a smarter way to think about aligning passion with purpose and practicality?
Yeah, I live that too. You can tell a lot of what I do in the program is based on my own wrong, what I would call missteps, but maybe they were just informing me. But I got into I bootstrapped the development of a consumer electronics device. I had no background in that, but I did have a good idea, and it was a good idea. We put together a development team. The product was great. It was a cooking thermometer, a Wi-Fi cooking thermometer. And I'm a big, passionate outdoor smoking and grilling fan. I've always loved that. And I saw a need, and there was a need, and we created it. And, what I found was that the creating of it and the putting the team together was really fun. I hated the industry, and I didn't know that I hated it till I got in it. And it wasn't that there was bad people. It's a very, thin margin transactional business. It's not a people business. And I'm a people person. And so that was one of those whys I should have spent more time on. And so I think that that's what's so important as we consider this follow your passion thing that's so common in the advice, that we hear. It can be, but you need to go into it with your eyes open. And I think it's important to really figure out, okay, just because I'm passionate about something doesn't necessarily mean I should build this next phase of my life around it. Maybe it's better just have it be a hobby or a obsessive interest or whatever it was or is. You might be a fantastic chef or cook, but owning a restaurant's a very different experience, or being a green thumb and having a nursery, very different, right? And so I'm not really averse to it conceptually. I just think that it merits some deeper thought. And it really gets into, are these areas where you have your strengths and your abilities and your talents? And are you going to be fulfilled and motivated in that space? And that's when I found out I've never cooked less in my life than I did when it was part of my work, because it went from a get to a have to. And so I think that's where I really encourage people to be, judicious about that.
Jack, I think that some people in their 50s and 60s feel that they really don't have enough runway left to reinvent themselves. What do you coach your clients who feel that way, and how do you help them take those beginning steps to move down the right path?
Yeah, I hear that a lot. I think it's just we all start to feel mortality as we move into, this third act of life, right? 50s, 60s, 70s, beyond. And so there's a sense that we don't want to go down wrong paths. And we don't always know ahead of time what a wrong path might be. And so that's where analysis paralysis sets in. We know we want to do something, but we don't know what that is. We're not decisive. So we stay stuck. But then we get frustrated being stuck and we know we need to do something and it just becomes an endless loop. And I think what is really important is to let go of this striver's expectation that we had with our first career, where our careers become this 30-year body of work that we judge every other effort in our life against. And just drop that and realize that this next active life is not about that. And it's not practical anyway. We're not going to build another 30-year career when we're 60, right? Not like we did our first careers. And so, let's have some fun with it and let's keep it light. And what we advocate for is what I call casting a wide net. It's trying different things. Working, in software development, they're all about sprints. Parts of the software development project are broken down into, maybe 10-day sprints where everybody's focused on this one aspect of it. And I think that's a great metaphor for people in an encore career. Let's try some stuff. Let's have some fun. Let's not make it a huge pass fail. If you like to write, put a couple articles out there and see if you enjoyed it and see if you get any traction. If you want to be a consultant or an advisor, put together a pilot program that, you're doing for a relative pittance relative to what you think your real value is so that you can get a pilot program together and you can start learning and you can see yourself doing things. Our subconscious needs to see that we are actually doing it in order to believe it and compel us to keep going with it. Otherwise, it's just in our head. And so I think that's what's important is getting into action, but it needs to be right action, which comes from spending enough time on the why at the beginning.
Jack, have you seen examples of people discovering unexpected callings through their encore careers? Something that maybe even surprised them? And if you have, what do those stories tell us about this life stage?
Yeah, I mean, one of our clients was a CIO of a multi-billion dollar manufacturing company in the upper Midwest, and he was with that company his whole life. He's, I guess, 65 now, maybe. And he got quote early retired, in a consolidation or an M&A thing, and so he wasn't really ready for that, but that was it. And so one of the things that he had done was to take up distance running late in life. After he was 60, he's run 10, 12 marathons now, and he's got younger runners coming to him that are kind of in awe, look at him like he's Yoda, that he's doing all these distance runs in amazing times. And he didn't even start till he was 60 years old. So he's exploring being a running coach for people. And maybe he'll go through with that completely. Maybe he won't. But I think that's a great example of something that's completely different from the career that he was in. I have another client who is a recruiter, a corporate recruiter, and she kind of got a surprise divorce handed to her when she was in her 50s. She didn't see it coming, didn't want it, but that was what happened. And she had been a stay-at-home mom for 20 years. And so, kids were grown, she was alone, and she had to get back in the workforce. And that was a jarring experience. And she learned a lot the hard way. And so, we've talked to her about the potential, how many, women are in similar situations out there who, left their career to focus on their families and then, end up in a new phase of life where they're single and need to get back into it, and how much of a need there is for people who can bring that wisdom of their experience to help people that are just starting that journey. And so that's a great example, I think, of an encore career where it's nothing to do with what she did professionally, but she has amazing people skills and empathy doing what she did. And that's transferable, to this new venture that she's contemplating.
Jack, with more and more Americans over 50 starting businesses or pivoting careers, what impact do you see this having on the landscape of work as it evolves over the next years and decades? And what do you think the role of Encore professionals will play in shaping that evolution?
It's a really good question. And my optimistic side really thinks this is the beginning of a realignment of what's capable and possible out there. We as a society have just bought into this vision of post retirement as a time of leisuring and winding it down and just sort of, getting on what I call the decline railway, right? One little step at a time down into decay and decline. So I think the first thing is that people who are heading into that time of life need to just reject that. I love the image in the Matrix movie of the red pill, blue pill, and I forget which one is the one you want to take to wake up, but that's the one you want to take, right? You don't want to buy into this idea that, I'm old and this is my time to wind it down and all of that. So I think there needs to be a part on the individual to reject that. And then I think what's going to happen is as you start to see people who are thriving and creating their encore careers and delivering deep value to society in their 60s and 70s and beyond, then I think society will start to say, oh, yeah, you know what? Getting to that age isn't what it was when my grandparents and great grandparents were around. And I think there'll start to be an awareness that people have a lot to offer. And actually, the act of being vibrant and energetic and doing purposeful things, keeps you healthier. There's a lot of data behind that. And then I think it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy of people living longer and doing better because that's what they're doing. And then we have hopefully a really positive cycle for our society because we just don't have enough people that are coming into the system as payers to support all of these older generations that are living longer that will be the payees. And so the longer we can continue to have thriving encore careers where we're self-supporting, the better off we're going to be as a society.
Jack, if someone who's listening right now is standing at that crossroads themselves, wondering what's next after a successful career, what do you think that first question they should ask themselves to start designing their own positive encore career?
I think the first thing to do is to start getting an appreciation for the wisdom you've accumulated and the talents that you have. After 30 years in a corporate or professional career, we get so used to viewing ourselves as a specific set of skills and abilities that are used by our companies or the ones we've created. And we got to let all that go. And I think part of what we start with our clients with that I would really encourage your listeners to do is to really take an inventory of these life experiences. It can be professional, it can be personal. What do people come to you for? What are these things that people rely on you for? What do you know now that you wish you knew then? When you see somebody going into a major life crisis or challenge and you know what that's going to be like, what could you offer them to help them make that journey easier or even not a bad experience at all? Those are all things to start to dig into and surface and start to see this Venn diagram of where what you have to offer and what comes naturally to you and you just love doing these kind of flow state activities overlapped with where the real need is. And that, to me, that middle ground is where the best encore careers really come from.
What a great experience that you have painted for us all, Jack, and I really want to thank you for that. You remind us that that next chapter isn't about just slowing down, it's about showing up differently. And so whether you're in your 50s, 60s, or beyond, the encore isn't the end of the performance. It's the moment the audience leans in for more. Thank you, Jack, for your thoughts and experiences on this topic. We will all face this crossroads at some point in time in the future, and we will do it much more informed and eyes wide open because of your discussion. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you, Bob. It's been a privilege to be here. I really appreciate it. And I've enjoyed our conversation.